Hello everyone, this is Ed Runkle, pastor at Tapestry Church, seen here weekly on LCTV channel 66, and you may see us live every Sunday morning at 10:30 at 22 Crady Avenue. Good morning everybody, welcome to Tapestry Church. I'm so glad you're here. Hey, I have a question for you this morning. I actually posted this on our church Facebook page the other day, and but maybe you aren't on Facebook. The question, here it is, are any of you would you say that you are inclined to worry? I mean, sometimes I think people, mostly people who don't know me very well, would view me as kind of laid back and calm, but inside is a veritable vortex of nervous emotion. For as long as I can remember, I was prone to worry. As a kid, I would worry about what my family and friends and classmates thought of me. I would worry about my grades or how I was doing. When I got to high school, I started worrying about going on dates. I didn't actually go on any dates, but I worried about, how it would go if I did go on dates, and on and on. Can anybody relate? Not to the lack of dates part, but the part about worrying. Do any of you guys, find that you kind of worry recreationally? I'm not the only one, am I? Worry is not only common, it's almost expected in our culture. As long as worrying doesn't become excessive, a term with no clear definition, or interfere with productivity in our social lives, it's widely considered a healthy sign of life and an indicator of engagement. After all, shouldn't important, hard-working people have a lot to worry about? And aren't the good parents the ones who care enough to worry about their kids? Worry is one of those acceptable sins. A sin where everybody does it, but we don't often address it, like gossip. Worry is something we all know we're not supposed to do, but we often just kind of gloss over it and maybe even call it something else, something like stress. But deep down, we want to be freed from the chronic feeling of dread and the expectation that something horrible lurks just around the corner. But those what-if thoughts seem like such a part of us that we don't quite know how to stop. Well, here's what a wise pastor by the name of Paul had to say about worry, and this is in a letter that Paul wrote to the church in Philippi. So from the New Testament book of Philippians in chapter 4, these are verses 4 through 9. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. How many of you have ever had that dreadful experience of hearing yourself say one of those sayings from your parents you swore you would never say? Like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Or if so-and-so, were to jump off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Anybody ever on the receiving end of one of those statements, or maybe on the giving end of one of those statements? Well, at the heart of the text we're looking at this morning is a very simple statement, one, similar to what you might have heard your parents say when you were growing up. Paul says, don't be anxious about anything. In other words, don't worry about your job or your finances. Don't worry about your 401k or about your physical appearance. Don't worry about being single or about your health. Don't worry about your kids. Don't worry about anything. And if you're like me, Paul saying, don't worry about anything, is about as helpful as a parent saying, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about. I mean, how in the world is that possible to, stop worrying? Part of worry is just how your brain is wired. There's actually a particular genetic trait which some people carry that correlates with a disposition for worry. And some of you are now worried that you have that trait. I mean, worry is not something you try harder to stop doing. I mean, it's like telling somebody to try harder to go to sleep at night. Most people who try to stop worrying end up worrying more about the fact that they can't stop. So Paul's not saying here, try harder, or just saying try harder, but actually gives us some practical advice for confronting worry. And for one thing, Paul says, ask God for help. I know, like imagine that, right? But maybe you've noticed this. It's interesting. When a person is worrying about something, there tends to be a lot of thinking and talking to oneself. What am I going to do? How am I going to get through this? So see, in a way, our worries are fed by a cycle of self-talk. And so one thing we can do to interrupt the cycle is to talk directly to God instead. So instead of, me saying to myself, what am I going to do? Or, if I'm worrying about, something at church or my family, how are we going to handle this situation? I go directly to God and say, God, I need your help with this situation at work or with this family situation. And did you notice Paul tells us to do this in which situation? Every situation. When you're worried about decisions or actions of your teenage or adult child or your spouse or your friend, ask God for help. Or when you're unsure about how you're going to pay all your bills this month, ask God for help. I mean, there's this great principle in the Bible. Prayer and worry are mutually exclusive. Don't be anxious, but pray. Those two things simply cannot live together. Either the worry is going to destroy the prayer, or the prayer is going to destroy the worry. One result of coming to the living God in prayer is that worry shrinks and dies at the feet of Jesus. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but I don't use the term the Lord in reference to Christ all that often. I'm kind of with Nadia Boltz-Weber on this. I've never been a fan of the overuse of the term the Lord. Like when people say, I just love the Lord. I never really know what that means. I mean, the way it's casually thrown around sometimes makes me uncomfortable, especially, after Harry Potter, since Voldemort is called the Dark Lord. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that for whatever reason, I can't handle the overuse of that expression. But, and this is important, this I know, Jesus is Lord. You and I, on the other hand, are not. Their needs we can't meet. There are things we can't control. We're limited at best and dependent on God's good grace every moment. There are no needs that exceed God's ability. He is eternal, and He withholds nothing good from His children. Even death, which is not good, has been overcome, and everything sad will become untrue. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's kind of arrogant of us to keep all of our worries and cares and anxieties to ourselves and not, give them over to God. I mean, think about it. You know how sometimes well-meaning Christian will say to somebody in a real mess of pain, God won't put on you more than you can bear. I mean, maybe you've said that or you've had that said to you. I'm sure it was said with the intent of bringing comfort. Unfortunately, though, cliches like that have the tendency to do the opposite. They can actually cause tremendous discomfort and lead people away from the gospel, away from God, the true source of comfort. It's kind of like when a well-meaning Christian says to me, when God closes a door, he opens a window. I start immediately looking around for an open window so I can push them out, because that's just not helpful. God, won't opens a window, or God won't put on you more than you can bear. Often that makes the person on the receiving end, if they feel overwhelmed, something must be wrong with me. Or when they feel like they're falling apart under the pressure, they believe that God won't put more on them than they can bear, then there are really only two options: to believe that they simply don't have enough faith and are failing to trust in God, or to believe that God has abandoned them and left them to face their suffering alone. I mean, here's something interesting. According to Amazon, the most highlighted passage in all books on Kindle, at least I think as of November of 2014, it's highlighted almost twice as often as any other passage. It's from the second volume of the Hunger Games, Catching Fire. It's not a particularly poetic passage, not a particularly profound passage, but here it is, and you can look it up, Google it, on your own when you get the chance. But here it is, because sometimes things happen to people and they're not equipped to deal with them. See, here's the truth. In reality, God often gives us more than we can bear, but He invites us to bring the excess weight to Him and to His people. In other words, the church. That is, God bears the burden, we cannot. That is why, the Apostle Peter in one of his letters urges us to cast all our anxiety on Him, because He cares for you. And Paul encourages the church community in Galatia to carry one another's burdens. The entire message of the Bible is that you cannot bear your own burdens, and that Jesus loved you enough to come to earth and bear them for you. I mean, Jesus says it bluntly, apart from me, you can do nothing. And then He offers the words of ultimate comfort, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." In other words, we should probably never say to anyone, God won't put on you more than you can bear, but instead should always say, God won't put on you more than He can bear. One of the greatest things about God, the God of the Bible, is that He commands us to let Him work for us before commanding us to ever do anything for Him. God wants to be a burden bearer because it demonstrates His power and puts Him in a class by Himself among the so-called gods of the universe. I mean, there's a relationship between humility and anxiety. Humble people cast their anxieties on God, not just some, not just the major ones, all of them. Proud people don't. Proud people worry. When Peter says that Jesus cares, that means He cares about the thing that has you worrying, or those things, plural. It means He will not stand by and let things develop without His influence. It means He will act, He will work, not always the way, we would. I mean, God has sees 1,000 connections that we don't see, but He cares about your worries. And the way, that we express our trust is prayer. Prayer is our trust turned toward God and spoken. So one practical way to deal with your worries is to write down or make a list of all the things that worry you. Title the list, My Worry List. Then scratch out the word worry and put in its place prayer. Now you have a prayer list instead of a worry list. Then every time you catch yourself beginning to worry, Pray instead. Place your worries in God's trustworthy hands. Because though it sounds cliche, God really is greater than your worries. And then, Paul says, pay attention to what you let your mind dwell upon. Or as the late Christian thinker, philosopher Dallas Willard put it, the ultimate freedom we have as human beings is the power to select what we will allow or require our minds to dwell upon. See, at the end of the day, taking on worry is not a matter of trying harder not to worry. It's mostly a matter of it's mostly about what you're feeding your mind, day in and day out. Because your mind is always taking in ideas and images that produce thoughts and feelings that eventually lead to attitudes and actions. Paul says, think about whatever is true. And what a great question to ask yourself, particularly in a moment of anxiety. Is this thought true? Is it valid? Can I trust it? Because I don't know about you, but when I'm afraid, negative sentiments fill my heart, my mind. They're loud and bossy and persuasive, but are they reliable? I mean, feelings are so fickle, changing moment to moment. Instead of passively believing feelings, we can choose to believe and act on God's truth. Paul says, think about whatever is noble or honorable, about whatever is right or pure. One of the reasons reading Scripture is so helpful is that our minds get to engage in what is right and pure. Now, don't misunderstand. Paul's not saying we shouldn't care or be concerned. We should care enough or be concerned enough to do what we can in a situation that could potentially worry us. For example, if you're in school, and you have a test coming up, you should care enough about your grade that you take the time to study and prepare, but you shouldn't sit around, worrying about your grade. God intends us to live a life of freedom from worry, not freedom from concern, not a complacency where I couldn't care less. That's irresponsible. To have concern that you take to God in prayer is one thing, but to be anxious about the outcome, that's another. I think we at times assume our choice is to either worry or withdraw. But refusing to worry doesn't mean refusing to care. We can care deeply and be at peace. We can recognize that what we care about is in good hands, God's hands. And in fact, letting go of worry can free us to care more generously, can give us more clear-headed orientation for considering how to solve problems, and can give us greater courage for taking action. Do you see what I'm saying? Fretting about the future, which is a fruitless and brutal exercise, is different than planning the future, which is a good and faithful response. Let me just ask you, what has your mind been on today? What has your thought life been orbiting around? What has your automatic self-talk focused your attention upon? What are you concentrating on? A problem? How much work you have to do this week? Or, some past regret or future fear? In a sense, concentration is everything. What you choose to concentrate on today will not only shape your day, but your emotions, your relationships, how you do your work. As I read the Bible, this theme seems to jump off the page. God is constantly telling us how to think, how not to think, and where to put our focus. And we lose power and joy when we don't concentrate on the right things. Haven't you had this experience? You let yourself get all caught up in yesterday's regrets, today's burdens, and tomorrow's fears, and quickly, faith and joy become strangers. Concentration is a choice. If we want power over our worries, choose to concentrate on the right things. Because the thing about worry, so much of it is preoccupation with ourselves. How am I doing? How will this go? But see, when we tend to fixate, when people tend to fixate on themselves and ruminate over their problems, that quickly can degenerate and become something obsessive and anxiety-ridden. I mean, think of Pharaoh, the Old Testament book of Exodus. Many of you know the story. Pharaoh's kind of the poster boy for maladaptive self-absorption, right? I mean, all he can think about is himself, and it impoverishes his heart. I have to have more slaves so I can have more bricks, so I can have more storage units, so I can keep more grain, so I can hoard more wealth. How much do I have? Not enough. How much do I need? More. I mean, Pharaoh is the richest guy in Egypt, and Pharaoh is the most financially insecure guy in Egypt. He's miserable. It's a miserable life dwelling on our worries. And here's something more. It doesn't work. I mean, Jesus put it like this in one of his sermons. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? What good does most of your worrying do? What does it ultimately accomplish? Pretty much, nothing except a lot of stress and heartache. It's kind of like scratching an itch. Scratching provides blissful relief for a moment, but then what? I mean, the itch comes back with a vengeance. There's a recent study coming out that reports serotonin, one of those chemicals that helps transmit signals throughout nerve cells, might be to blame. The theory goes like this: when we scratch an itch, it causes a small amount of pain to the affected skin, and that pain serves as a distraction, numbing us to the itch itself. But the pain also triggers the release of serotonin in the brain. Serotonin dulls the pain, but it also reacts with neurons that carry itch signals to the brain. So as the pain of the scratch dies away, the itch roars back even stronger. And so you get caught up in this cycle, of itch and scratch and itch, until we're left with raw and itchy skin. It's a miserable life dwelling on our worries, and it doesn't work. So let me ask you, what are you choosing to dwell on? Because the fruit of taking seriously what you dwell on will be significant. Your moods will be different, your attitude will be different, your patience will be different, your level of worry will be different. A few years ago, a subway stop in New York City had two movie posters adjacent, right next to each other. And the first poster was for the film Extraordinary Measures, starring Brendan Fraser and Harrison Ford. The tagline of the film was, "Don't hope for a miracle, make one." The second poster was for the film The Book of Eli, starring Denzel Washington, and it has the tagline, "Deliver us." Both films represent two radically different approaches to life. Extraordinary Measures summarizes life. The basic message is, you're on your own. It's up to you. The basic message of the Book of Eli summarizes the gospel. You are not on your own. There is a true deliverer. When you cry for deliverance, he will answer. I mean, this is Paul's thought, his final thought, and maybe the most important thought of all. He says at the end, "And the God of peace will be with you." In other words, at the end of the day, when fear takes hold, when your mind is racing, you can't make it stop, you're not on your own. You're not alone. God is with you. Some of you are worried right now about some relationship or another. You're not alone. Some of you are worried about a family issue or a health issue. You're not alone. Some of you are in a situation where there is no clear answer and you're in way over your head. But here's what I know. You're not alone. God is with you, and He's not just with you. He loves you, and right now He's inviting you out of your fear and into His love. Maybe it sounds a bit cliche to say, you're not alone. You're not on your own. But holy shift. I mean, some of you just woke up and are like, what did he say? I said, holy shift. S-H-I-F-T. It's a matter of holy shift to go from it's up to me to I'm not alone. I mean, think about it. Probably the single most frequent source of worry for every one of us in this room is other people's opinions of us. If this happens, what will they think? What will people say? Will I be laughed at? Will I be excluded? We have this desire for others to see us as impressive and admirable. Our greatest worry is that they won't, but will instead see us as deficient. What difference would it make if we knew deep within that the only one whose opinion finally matters is not only with us, but has already chosen us for a lifetime achievement award because of his performance for us in our place? Holy shift. Wouldn't we relax? Wouldn't it free our creativity to perform better on this stage of life? Wouldn't it help us to cheer someone else's success? We'd no longer need to engage in the awful business of making ourselves good over against or by comparison with each other. Instead, we could relax about being good, and as we relax, we'd find ourselves becoming something much better, much richer than we could possibly imagine. In other words, though it may sound cliche, God is greater than even your greatest worry. What is that for you? Thank you for joining us at Tapestry Church this morning. We hope you enjoyed the message. For more information, you may check out our website or Facebook page, and you may see us live weekly at 22 Crady Avenue at 10:30. All are welcome.